Hello. Hope you can hear me okay. If not, let me know. And I'll officially start us off in just a few minutes. Hi, Lynn. How are you? Oh, this is just for my own sake. I've been working on Christmas Carol illustrations for a while, and I revisit them every year and adapt them and change them. I do a thing. One of the advantages of digital is that it lets you revisit work without destroying the originals. And with some of this, I like to, since it's, it's annual, so I can revisit on schedule annually. And it also makes the illustrations, they seem to have a life of their own if I change them every year and adapt them and advance them as far as I can. So they aren't the same year by year. They kind of take on a life of their own. And yeah, so it's just stuff for the Christmas Carol and a couple of Christmas themes on my own that are just ideas that were floating around. So yeah, so I'll go ahead and start this officially. So I'm just going to be sketching a little bit today. Doing my usual routine. I'm probably going to be jumping back and forth across 5 or 6 pictures, and working on Christmas Carol illustrations, but also just a couple of random illustrations of my own. And I may start one out, get the basic building blocks of the drawing in, um, take a picture from original sketch to uh, a little fuller stage. This one was a drawing. Um, yeah, and other than that, I'll try not to talk too much during these things. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to jump in, and I'll answer as I can. And yeah, put on some Christmas music if you'd like, or some Ronnie James Dio, one or the other, but nothing else. Well, and let me know if any of my screen placements interrupt each other. I noticed I had my big head blocking the drawing for part of it last time. So let me know if there's any sound or other technical issues that pop up. Oh, and there is going to be, at a little later point, I'm going to do a quick shoulder anatomy demo. I've been looking around at a lot of art lately, and I'm noticing that uh, there seems to be some difficulty in understanding how the shoulder works from a few different angles from the front, how the muscle insertion works. So I'm just going to take maybe 5 minutes and go over that a little bit, uh, if that's all right with everybody, because it's driving me nuts, frankly. I look at it and I just go, that's so wrong. So bear with me in my grumpy old impatience. wouldn't pick your work apart, Lynn. You know what? I try to do a thing. This is just a little aside. Lynn mentions when looking at portfolios, I pick anatomy apart. I'm sure you could easily do the same for mine. I have a strict thing about not picking other people's work apart. But if I think I have a better solution or a good idea, what I'll do is I'll actually take it and I'll draw the same thing and present my solution and or give over the information I have the best I can because I despise critique. I don't think it's a useful thing. I think it's a damaging vandalism that is largely based in people wanting to dominate one another. So instead, I do tend to think that, and what I've found is that trying to find what's wrong with something does not do anything. That's just dwelling on one's guilt. However, if you try to chase after your successes, things that are done properly and are properly organized and well ordered tend to lead to the next thing in a sequential chain as to what's right. So I always try to find what's going well or what's in the right direction and build on that, not looking for what's wrong, not even noting what's wrong. The accomplishing what's not right, if it's done in a picture and it's there, is already done. You've succeeded in not doing something right. The thing we're trying to find is what is right and building on that. What's the next one? So I wouldn't tear your work apart or anything. I'd instead look at it and try to give over. If I thought there was a better solution or a different idea, I'd try to give that over as coherently as possible. I think I tend to be a bit alone in some of these ideas with this because I do know that critique is a pretty popular thing, but I've never it almost seems masochistic. It's like it's almost a thing where it's trained to have good humor while someone else is preying on you, and it's I don't think it's very good, and I don't actually think it applies to art or building anything. So that's just my thoughts on it. What do I know? Lynn says, I just noticed things that would bug me about what I'm looking at. Oh man, me too. Like sometimes I'm looking at artists' work and I'm just uh, amazed at uh, some of the things that they're focusing on. I'd have to say, like with some anatomy things, I've seen a lot of stuff going around lately. Questions like, do I need to, if I'm going to draw, do I need to know anatomy? If I'm an animator, do I need to know how to draw? If I do VFX, do I need to know how to draw? Yeah, you do. Yes, absolutely. If you're going to draw people, you need to know anatomy because it's not only the mechanism through which this machine works, but it also allows you to play with time. It allows you to tell a story. And when we're drawing, we're largely making an outfit for somebody to project agency into. We're making people for them to wear and sympathize with. And if you get angles wrong, it's just not going to be convincing. It isn't a well-tailored suit for somebody else to pilot. So yeah, sometimes when I'm looking at the anatomy, I definitely go, oh, come on now, there's books on this, you can go right to it. Go exercise in front of a mirror for a minute, for crying out loud. But that's because I'm cranky. But really, study anatomy, everybody. Do it. I'm not joking. I'm serious. Study the anatomy and do it right now. Well, not while I'm drawing. Keep an eye on what I'm doing because it's super important. But after that, anatomy. Lynn said, I find anatomy is also something you get really rusty at if you step away for too long. There's a couple of fixes for that. First is like doing an initial drawing where um, you find out where you're rusty. So that part's initially discouraging. But once you've done that, if you give it a couple of days and you exercise, basically if you make your body go through the motions of having to deal with and navigate its different parts using like your somatosensory system and your making sure your mechanosensory system are getting plenty of input. After a couple of days, it'll start to shake the rust off and get you where you need to be. It is discouraging though those first couple of days, especially because you have a sense or a feeling that you know these things and they're not coming out right. But the other part of that is that it's between the last time you were drawing anatomy and where you're at, your brain has progressed and your subtle understanding of anatomy has also progressed, even if you haven't drawn it. So you're going to be harshly judging what you think you know because you've actually advanced accidentally. And it takes a little bit to coordinate the two things, where you've advanced, where you are a bit rusty, and just churning things into gear. Also, Speaking of anatomy, um, I'd like to point out kind of a weird thing. Here's a quick tip, um, that pinkies are a pretty interesting signature for a drawing. Um, Even though it's just it's a uh, minor thing to draw. If you have resting pinkies, that means action has kind of settled, or things are closing in and gripping. But if you have raised pinkies and your palm starts to open out, that tends to mean that there's pending action, or in a moment you're going to do something. It's like an initial instigator. So anything where it's like there's a flipping of the hand, like this, or an opening out, this is an indicator that things are active, things aren't settled and sorted. If it's at too high an angle, it looks superposed. But if it's at a mid angle, like not shooting out too much energy from your pinkies, it's almost a pointer of directional attention. So if you want to give over a sense that something's moving forward, or how would I put it, pending, your pinkies are a good indicator of that. Okay, let's jump pictures a bit. Can everybody still hear me okay? And is the audio and video working okay? Okay, let's take a second and look at the shoulder anatomy using this guy. So this is the first spirit in A Christmas Carol. I'm gonna do a quick draw over on him to give over some of especially this information right here. This connector is where there seems to be issues, and so let me do a quick anatomy lesson. Okay. So I'm going to draw out the anatomy a bit, and we'll écorcher him somewhat, which is usually like bones up build, but I'll abbreviate it. I'll hint at where bones are, or I'll show explicit areas where bone connections are, and then we'll move on from there. So set that there. Okay, and this area here seems to be a largely difficult area. Sorry about that. Did I lose everybody for a second? Okay, so I've got the sternomastoid set up. I'm basically trying to set up here some areas where you can see tugging on the bone. So if the clavicle's here, there's muscle pulling and causing some of the shaping of the bone. It's molding the bone, basically. Okay, so if we look at a clavicle is somewhat like this. Okay. This bowing here is a few different things. It's the pull of the trapezius coming in. Here, the pulling and the bowing is from the pectoral muscle. Some of the pulling and evening out here comes from the sternomastoid, and then we have some of the more interior neck and shoulder muscles. Okay. Here also, this part up to about that knot is the anterior head of the deltoid. So if we put the humerus right here, coracoid process, kind of doing an X-ray there. Okay. The anterior head of the deltoid, the medial head of the deltoid connecting through, here's a tendinous mass, and it tends to be pretty fibrous and overlapping fibers, almost like feathers. Okay. One of the parts of the anterior head of the deltoid that from behind it is pressing partially the coracoid process, partially the humerus is also pressing forward, and its fibers tend to go in this direction. Then it's got a tendinous attachment here. It sits right beside the upper pectoral muscle, and they have kind of a relationship that goes top and then bottom. They have a bit of a curve that says this guy is prominent at the top, this guy comes in and is prominent at the bottom, and it actually comes in and inserts underneath. So here's where the muscle mass ends, and then here's the tendinous material, and here the muscle still continues for the pectoral muscle, this top pectoral muscle. Let's actually turn that black. So it's got a bit of a curvature. So this is prominent, and then this is prominent, because the muscle, there's a bit of a gap between those. So when drawing an arm, and this may be somewhat messy, sorry about that. If you think of angles and going through the curvature and angles, think of landmarks. So here's the tip of the clavicle. So right about here would be the head of the humerus. Here's tendinous material. So there will be overt signs of that when you're drawing. It will influence the angles of the terminus when you're drawing, angles of the, actually there's a rim light on me there. The angles of, here's the, don't have my, I'm looking at the camera also. The angles of the terminus here will help determine the shaping of it, but that also includes not just the muscle mass, but tendinous material and bony material on which the muscle is sitting. This is getting technical and tedious. I'll finish up in just a minute here. Okay, so when drawing the different heads of the deltoid, keep in mind that it's muscle mass resting on bone, and it's sliding over bone, and it'll be interacting with bone. So each of the three groups, the anterior head, the medial head, and the interior head. Wait, this is the interior head. The anterior head. The posterior head. Pardon me. The anterior head here will have its own flexion, usually coming up at an angle like this. If you can see me there, okay? And often integrates with and looks like it's of the family of the pectoral muscle, okay? And the pectoral muscle, which I'm drawing right here, oftentimes looks like it's one with the anterior deltoid. So this guy and this guy, when drawing, will often look like one mass. Okay. Now this is fine. So this also indicates where some of the bends and folds are when your arm is down. Okay. The next part I want to get to with this, the part that seems to be problematic, is arm down, and I'm just going to draw it real quick. Okay, at this insertion point, now there's a couple of tricks for proportioning and ratios. One is at this little divot where the deltoid and the pectoralis and the clavicle meet. There's a little bit of a gap there. This gap is usually the same placement as the nipple, and sorry, my glasses are falling off there. And it's also about the same placement going straight down, if you were just to draw somebody, of the pelvic bone protruding from the torso. Okay, and the navel's right about there. Okay, so you can look at it like this is a straight down. So if you drew a human, if you were drawing a human, you could actually do a tube, go nipple, clavicle area, pelvis, if you just have them aligned there, and you can start to get a pretty good basis for a decent anatomy setup. Okay. All right, I'm going to shut this off because it might be a little confusing for the next part. Now the next part is when the arm is up. What I'm seeing a lot of is people are drawing this when the arm's up. How do they do it? They're drawing it like this. It's almost like they understand there's muscle insertion from the pectoralis muscle, and there's a muscle insertion or a separation between the deltoid. This part gets really clumsy, and sometimes it's just a line indicating or saying they're delineated. What I want to do is point out and show some of the more complicated parts of this that also give a sense of better organic placement. That'll work. That sounds like a term. Write that down, please. So one of the first things is we'll draw an arm out. Okay, so I'll narrate a little bit what I'm going through here. Anterior deltoid, a little bit of the medial deltoid showing up. Okay, so as I've mentioned, the deltoid will come in and overlap at this part, and then it subducts a bit and the pectoralis will come in. Now it creates, there's tendinous material here also, and it also has a visible sign. It's almost like a gap. Okay, so we'll draw this guy and a little bit of a shadow. So the muscle here will actually bunch up. Okay, and I'll show an x-ray of that in just a second. Okay, so this part here will bunch up. There's part of your pectoralis muscle that is attached and part is fairly free floating. Okay, and it's basically an area right here. And underneath there is your pectoralis minor. Okay. For this area, though, it does create a bunching, a bit of a spherical shape with the pectoralis and the deltoid mixing. The trick to looking at it is the angle of the border. So part of it would be thinking of the bicep coming in and then its relationship to the pectoralis coming in. Okay, you can give hints and indications about the deltoid still, but the insertion points are sounds so uncertain. The insertion points here, how these muscles interact and subduct pectoralis to its meeting point at the bicep, and then back on this end over here away from the meeting point, having the deltoid signal that it's part of a mass helps. So knowing that this area here will bunch up, it's the floating part of the pectoral muscle, and then connecting up again to the ribs is the connecting pectoral muscle. Okay, like that. So, for example, on this guy, I'm going to show this a little bit. Pectoral muscle, a little bit of tendinous material and anterior deltoid, but the bicep is then giving out an outer edge. Okay, here I'll just have it like that. Okay. Also, when your hand is up facing like this, as opposed to when your hand is down facing like that, there's going to be a dramatic difference in how your deltoid and pectoralis look. So the medial head of the deltoid will gain a bit more prominence. It'll be a little higher up, so if your thumb is facing upward, your anterior deltoid will be a lot more rounded, and you will not really see too much of the medial head, maybe a little bit right here. But here the medial head takes prominence. You can see a little bit of the tricep. Okay. So, part of the idea is remembering that this area is free floating, takes on some bunching because it's wrapping around the arm. It's a more flexible group than what attaches to the chest. And it comes in also, if you look at it almost like a fan, it comes in like this. Okay, and fans around. Almost at a point right here. Okay. If you were to draw it in an abbreviated way real quick, you'd go 1, 2, 3, and you'd basically have a good sense of flow and angle for where your drawing's going. Was that about as clear as mud? Anyhow, let's get back to the regular drawing part. Just get rid of these guys. Okay, I'm gonna start him out by easing up on some of the shadows when I originally drew it. I'm going to let angle give more information than than a delineated shadow. I think I originally did this drawing 2 years ago, so there's some things on here that I won't agree with today. pause for just a minute. Did anybody have any questions or anything you'd like to discuss or talk about? Hi, Lynn. I'm not doing that. That's ridiculous. Yeah, I could do that. A lot of what I'm doing right now with this feller is I'm uh, piggybacking off of the errors of the original drawing, or what I'm seeing as errors now. And I'm noting that with the light, so in the story, he emanates light. Is radiant in himself. Um, Making him radiant in himself is going to blow a lot of the shadowing, though. So I want to have it so that the light itself is a character, and it can partly tell the story. A problem that I notice a lot in illustration stuff, and what comes up in even in film work and video games and other media that I work in. There's a sense that characters exist on their own or a world unto themselves, and they aren't. Oftentimes, like how a character looks or seems in a setting will also add to who and what the character is. Um, in extreme examples, we could say like a vampire in daylight, the character is going to look different. Okay, so with other pieces, we can also say that, okay, depending on their setting, they may be more or less appealing, attractive, vulnerable, uh, any number of traits that we can think of will pop up in the character based on setting. Since he brings his own light, though, it's a little bit of a puzzle trying to think of how to give over senses of his angularity if he's light transmissive. The way we perceive a lot of the angularity, aside from silhouette, is through the form change equaling value change. If he's blown out because he has almost no values because his high exposure, it inhibits a number of my favorite tricks for making a character again, someone you can wear and sympathize with or understand their intentions. So I'm trying to right now figure out how to do a secondary thing, a pleasing look, which is bounce light. A lot of bounce light on him, as if he might have a high reflectance and high bounce light on him, but and I'm using those to substitute for light transmission. A lot of drawing and a lot of image making I find is trading principles. A principle like, or a property like incandescence for a different type of light radiance, but not an emissive light radiance. So there are things that I'll put around him, like maybe a glow that will be used to substitute or trick the eye into thinking that he's somewhat emissive, while still putting shadows and things in him that I want to help define the chiseled nature of his features, or the mix of old and young that he's supposed to be. So it's unclear his age exactly, because he looks like several different ages, both a child and someone old. So there are parts that I'm going to try to make to him that look older or have older signatures, but aren't aren't old. So basically putting wrinkles on his face that would be on an older person, but not showing the slide of fat or the so right here we have a muscle that comes around here, the malaris muscle. That's kind of like the facelift muscle. A lot of Caucasians don't actually have it, and because we don't, or it's very weak, and because we don't, we tend to get this part of our face does not pull up as much. It's almost like the facelift muscle. So it with that, I want to keep it like he's got strong muscle and skin tissue, but I also think what I want to do is add some line work, some signs that there's aging, use, and so on, just not the sliding and the lack of youthful integrity of the tissue itself. So I'm doing some trading here and there, trying to get him to match the description in the book and the what I'm perceiving is the character of him, and but at the same time make it so that he's easily read, easily discernible, and where was I going with that? I need a nap. But yeah, we'll leave it at that. And so right now the stuff I'm working on is just trying to set that up. can do a before and after. Hey Robert, how you doing? Oh, thanks, Tom. Oh, sorry, I got a question. Paul, have you ever tried your hand with graphic comics? Yeah, it wasn't my favorite. I, yeah, storyboarding and comics are two things that I've done, but I don't love. Um, they're I find doing the same character in a sequence of moments not the most interesting thing for me to do. I tend to like key moments and even key spans. So it's like my sense of the timeline. I don't setting up enough filler in between where events are taking place gets a little tedious. Also, drawing the same character over and over again can get a little bit wearing. So I've done it. I don't love it though. I haven't found it a medium that I really dive into and feel really comfortable and ambitious about. Um, I've seen other artists who do really nice stuff with it, but I'm just not that guy. Thanks, Tom. My pleasure. Feel free to send if you have any comments or you want to send me an email on any questions along the lines of that shoulder stuff. I'll be happy to go over it a little bit more. Or if it's like if there's enough interest in it and I find a coherent way to do it, I'll do a quick tutorial paint over on shoulder stuff. It is anatomy is really obviously complicated, and how we perceive it is also another level of complication, because how we perceive it isn't necessarily how it is physically, and trying to get it right, especially with arms, which are an extremely important cognitive director, is tough. So any questions on the shoulder stuff or things along those lines, feel free to send those along. Lynn asks, Paul, when you were learning anatomy, what books or artists did you study? Um, the first one, so when I started studying anatomy, I was about 8, and I was using a book that my mom had, which I think it was a Hungarian uh, author, and I think it's still available out there. I just don't remember what it was. But it's almost a summary and an addition to Paul Richer's Artistic Anatomy, the old classic from the French academic school, the École des Beaux-Arts. I hope I said that somewhat right. And it's still a nice standard to use. I recommend artists use that guy. In particular, it's got nice ink simplifications and abbreviations. It presents information in a way that's almost intuitive, but also keep an eye out for, there is a point where it will lead you astray with any reference of any sort. Anything that's going to try to teach you things, you will start to notice and see the artist's biases. Things don't look right. You know, various problems along those lines. It's not 100% accurate, but it's really fantastic. So finding out the accuracy is kind of up to you. But it's definitely a good start and introduction. After that, I started using photographic dissections and the more brutal and difficult anatomy stuff to deal with. Those are rough. I still I have a number of anatomical photographic dissection and reference books, and I do say it takes me a little bit of build up to use them, because I couldn't have been a doctor, is what I'm saying. They're tough. They're Once you get used to them after a couple of days of study, it's okay. But wow, it is. Don't have sandwiches anytime before or after on first introduction to them, because they are horrendous. They are. I've never done cadaver dissection or anything like that. It's not something I have a stomach for. But there are photographic reference books that I'd recommend using. They do help show some of the mistakes or generalization or shorthand that anatomical artists and authors are using. It gives you a real sense of how tendons play a part, the masses of like aponeuroses that influence how a muscle will look. They're really good, but again, brace yourself. I found them to be difficult to, and still do find them difficult to get past. I don't necessarily think I have a weak stomach or I'm especially squeamish, but there are moments. Oof, it's so rough. I saw. The question was, have I seen the tour of the plastinated bodies uh, exhibit? I did see one version of it in Las Vegas, which I was pretty awful. Um, and afterward, I understand it was a Chinese version of it, where, from what I understand, there's some controversy because it might have been the cadavers of political prisoners, some of whom didn't die of natural causes. Um, so I don't know what to make of that. It wasn't especially enjoyable. As I say, I don't think I'm squeamish, but I don't want to dive into uh, hanging out with cadavers. Just not my thing. Okay, that should work for the moment on that guy. Um, I don't think I'll jump on that real quick. I think the next one I'm going to start out, and we'll go for another half hour or so. I'm going to start out sketching Marley's Ghost. Uh, and see how far I get with that one. And then at about 11, I'll stop drawing, and if there's any questions or stuff like that, I'll go over those, and if not, everybody leave me alone. No. Robert asked, is it an unconscious process at this point, or do you still actively check and compare to something? It's unconscious at this point, but I also take almost every day to study something for up to an hour. So I'm always persistently chasing after anatomy or figures and seeing how, trying to pick up patterns and how the mechanisms work and so on. So I'm not using reference, but I am trying to make sure that I'm keeping it environmental, because when things are environmental, you don't have to necessarily feed and direct. So, like how I study now is different than how I studied when I was in my 20s and 30s. The way I study now is I put things in front of me to navigate and hunt down, but I'm not necessarily trying to find a property or a thing. Like when I look at anatomy stuff, I'm not looking to study anatomy. I know there are things in there that'll catch my attention and that I will backtrack and investigate, but I'm not necessarily looking for a thing like how do I, or things along those lines. I for a while I was doing that ritually, but it is ritual. It isn't really something that you need to do. Trying to direct your learning when it's an environmental thing is almost a stumbling block. Uh, Gaining acquaintance with your environment, and learning the affordances, the theory of affordances by Gibson, is basically you're already predisposed to picking up what in your environment you're going to use, predicting, projecting, pattern building around it. So if you're also on top of trying to find affordances, or navigating affordances, force feeding a method of study or what a preset category of what you think you should be learning, you're probably going to build a lot of anxiety. You're using mental energy. We have a finite amount of attention. I don't remember what the limits on that are at the moment. There's a couple of tests like the attentional awareness test you can find on YouTube, which shows, and there's a few versions of it, but it shows just how much finite attention you can spend on anything. So if part of your attention is devoted to thinking about where you're putting your attention, you're gonna kind of use up some mental energy that you might not want to spend. So I don't use reference back and forth anymore. I tend to just draw and try to understand the mechanics of a thing. I worry more about the cognitive toolkit, how I'm interacting with the audience and what the audience is going to see. There's an experiment. If you've got a second, let's do an experiment, which is if you draw a Q on your forehead. And I'll show you a thing that I mean, and there's a couple of ways to draw it, but I'll show you a demonstration. So if you right now draw a Q on your forehead, you can either do it so that it's this way and the tail of the Q is over your right eye, or this way and the tail is over your left eye, or you can do it in such a way that you're going like this with your palm facing your face, or you can do it like this with your palm facing out. Regardless of how you've done it back to front, this drawing of the Q demonstrates something. If you draw a Q so it's over, the tail's over your left eye, it means you're projecting and you're understanding or trying to figure out what a viewer of you is going to be seeing. You're making a cue that the viewer would see. Now, when I tend to do that, I have my palm facing outward, facing as if it's a face. So when I do it, I'm taking the point of view of the audience. When I draw a cue from my point of view, I do it outward, me projecting outward, as opposed to me understanding and using theory of mind to figure out what my audience is doing. So I spend a good deal of my time with the artwork, not trying to figure out the craftsmanship and the material tools or media. I'm much more concerned with what is it the audience, what am I building for the audience? How are their perceptions going to take this in? Where is their attention going to be? And am I making a character or a setting adequate for them to wear or pilot or project agency into, that they can do so naturally and easily? So a lot of what I'm doing is involved with how do you make the viewer partially the narrator or the protagonist in the image, so much so that they don't have to worry about thinking about a drawing. You know, it's more who's that guy as opposed to Paul drew that really well. I'd almost, I want to be as invisible as possible and be in the background. I want to give a suit for the audience to possess. So my thinking as I'm going through this is a lot more based in what's the environment, who is this person, what's their history, what's the throwaway history, the parts that you don't actually want to examine but give enough signal to say, hey, this person's been through something. I'm not sure what, I'm not going to examine it, but I know there's enough wear and tear or postural signatures to say, hey, this isn't idealized, it isn't a heroic thing, this is like a life thing, this is experiential. So studying like the anatomy and stuff is all good, and I know I need it, and try to make sure my hand-eye coordination is good, but a good deal of my time thinking is based in storytelling and tailoring outfits for to experience outfits, experience suits for people to wear. Did that make any sense? If that didn't make sense, let me know. Okay, here we go. On that thought, there's on YouTube, I think you can find a video by David Eagleman. He's a neurologist, and he did a PBS show. And he did a video on cup stacking, which is actually a demonstration of how the brain deals with expertise and how it archives and sets in the background so that when you have some expertise over something, you don't really think about it anymore. It's more reflex than it is forced knowledge. So I think what I'm trying to say is like learning the craftsmanship of the media is much more in the background now. Retreading it or worrying about it isn't really a thing I spend time on. Instead, my concentration and the direction my intentions are going are more to the audience as part of the process, as part of the toolkit, as well as interacting with me. Um, Tom asks, finding areas to tell story through subtleties. Subtleties and overt things. Hopefully there's a layered process, layers of priority and value. The first part being that when the first parts I want you to see in the picture are what, like the first parts you'd see interacting with a person. So uh, there's the obvious parts, the subtle parts, because usually I'm working in static images. If I'm working on an animation, I do different time tactics. It's almost like time release. The subtle details are because it's a static image and you do have an unusual amount of time to look at it and refer back and examine it. That's where the subtleties come in and reinforce the first pass of important information. So the subtleties just contribute. If you think about the way your brain creates experience isn't in a snapshot. It's very nebulous, and it takes place over a pretty long period of time. As it's building the pattern of what it's seeing over this long period of time, as your eye is traveling around and snapping to different parts, it's going to be taking in more and more reinforcing and pattern building information. So the subtleties in the storytelling don't necessarily need to be understood in the first pass, but they do enhance the story, and sometimes they even redirect the story a little bit. So using subtlety for narrative is an important process. But it's also understanding when and why your audience is going to see it. So if you think of a painting, if I do a painting for a 20-year-old, a lot of the facial expressions, a lot of the postures, and even color enhancement a 20-year-old will see because it is overt, it matches their experience. But in the background, if you put facial expressions that a 50-year-old would note, things with loss, weariness, evening out, facial expressions that are largely invisible to younger audiences that you actually have to experience to recognize. If you put those in the picture, when the 20-year-old is 50, they'll see a different picture than they did when they were 20. And you can embed a lifetime of information, of storytelling in one image if you put those subtle details in, basically where people are going to be arranging value, arranging what they pay attention to and what they notice. The way we data mine and pick out and pick and choose information is often self-referential. So some of the subtleties in a drawing, I know when I do them, they're going to be largely overlooked, blind. No one's going to see them first. But after several years, they may come back and go, oh, wait a minute, what the hell is that? So I think the subtleties are a super important narrative tool. You have to understand that they're going to be on a timeline. Some of them will be noticed right off. Some of them won't be noticed until years later. And it's good to bundle all time in a picture. Robert says, role-playing with a pencil? No, I'm a grown man. Maybe. I don't play with dolls, if that's what you're saying. Next question. Tom asks, Paul, earlier you mentioned insertion points for muscles. Once these are learned, do they help with understanding how the muscles will bunch when in motion? Is there a mechanic that can be utilized? Insertion points. Insertion points are let me do a quick thing here to show how insertion points, they make things easier. They allow, knowing where an insertion point is allows you basically to do the shortest distance property, to keep things simple. I am a big believer in elegance, which means laziness. I don't want to overwork or spend tons of time worrying over and noodling on a picture. I do want to be able to do it as quickly and easily as possible. So knowing insertion points give a ton of information. Insertion points tell you at once that point A and point B, here's the humorous again, we'll do some of the shoulder stuff. That is the worst ulna I have ever drawn, and I apologize to all the ulnas in the audience. Let's get that. Okay, so knowing insertion points, basically a point A and a point B definitely helps. And it also helps in thinking that, okay, if it's in profile, the same point A and point B. Here's your clavicle. Will shorten, and that shortening indicates a bunching, going from here to there. Definitely helps. It's an intuitive signal. It's right off, but it also tells you things about angles of anatomy, and angles of anatomy are super, super important. The angle and the pull on bones, the things that make bones and the overall architecture of the body shaped, like when you look at ribs, people will often do ribs like this. Ribs are like this because you have muscle pulling on these guys, and you have different muscles pulling on these guys and up here and so on. So when we're doing this, we're transverse abdominis, rectus abdominis, oblique abdominis. So when the bones are being pulled, it also helps give over accurate and convincing angularity of the body. People are not anatomists by nature. We do read angles, we read curve, line, corner, and intersections. Okay, we read boundaries, and we read places that collide and stuff like that. We delineate object from object, and we also use lines, like in a straight line, in like a property called good completion, to note connectiveness, to note connection when there's a loss in connection. All right, so we read those. We don't really read insertion point to this, that, or the other thing. What we do read is that if an arm has these two curvatures, that force is being used. Okay, so if these curvatures angle weird, we read that super fast. Knowing anatomy lets us know by angle where to appropriately set curvatures. So when you want to draw a convincing character, you want to do it in such a way that the curvatures make sense and they're organic. For us, setting up those curvatures, being artists and faking it, those curvatures, let's even do this. Will tell how true a thing is the longer we look at it. If we're looking at a human image especially, and we're not getting proper reads on the angles, we'll know that weight distribution is wrong, for example. We'll feel the difference. Part of that has to do with your mechanosensory system, your muscles, your aponeuroses and tendons. They have spindles in them that that determine and read pressure, angle of direction, duration, things along these lines. When we look at another person, these spindles fire, and they imitate. They read the other person's musculature and they fire. They send off a signal. And if somebody's standing wrong, we read that right away because our body goes, I just gave that an unnoticeable run through and that does not feel right. Which is why people talk about feeling in pictures quite a bit, because literally we're pinging how we feel. One of our senses of feeling, tactile feeling, or angular feeling. Pressure, weight, heat, all these things. If you do it wrong, it will read wrong. And the longer somebody looks at something, the clearer the signal will be as to whether or not it's right or wrong. So when we're using anchor points or insertion points, Those insertion points are a quick, easy way for us to set up those pieces in an abbreviated and quick hit, coherent way, without having to nag it, without having to overthink noodle, or even in a drawing you'll start to shift them because your perception of it will change because your body's shifting while you're drawing. So anchor points allow you to abbreviate but get clear signal for you to continue drawing. Yeah, I hope that made sense. This is not the sorry, this isn't the Marley's Ghost I was planning. Let's do that guy instead. So a little bit of the thinking as I'm going into this. I want Marley's Ghost to be broken down, give hints of skeletal raggedness. I'm not going to draw him super thin though. I'm going to use angularity to give over a sense of a skeletal framework. Or a protuberance, almost giving him the sense of being a doorway or like a door frame. I'm also going to do it from a bottom-up angle to give him a sense of intimidation. I'm going to make him overly tall and exaggerated. I'm going to distort his proportions quite a bit. Some of it's going to be anamorphic distortion and some of it's just going to be plain wrong. But I'm going to set it up that way so that, set it up in such a way that your eye jerks and the snapping of your eye to different key points will read as if he's okay. It does start to play with a sense of time though, because the arc of your eye is a sense that reads how long something takes. So if you mess around with the proportion of anatomy, where joints and connectors we use as an indicator, if you start messing around with those, it starts to dip into how we perceive motion in time. Because looking at other people are a type of clocks also. Oh, pleasure, Tom. I hope that made some sense. I'm also going to do a thing with his body and your perspective that it isn't a singular perspective. It's going to be more like you're looking at a lens, and the close and distance of him will, if we look at it in profile, the curve of distance from like his head to his feet, he will actually be bent in space in a way that he can't really be in if he were a person. So I'm doing it so that the closer points are actually distorted, and his body will have a curvature that hopefully no one will notice, although I'm telling you about it now. And it will mess around with a sense of importance and depth. There's a property that depth change equals importance change. Okay, so things closer and nearer have greater or lesser personal value. If you think of a tiger in the distance versus a tiger up close, we adjust how important and how much we want to attend a thing, but we also interpret close and far as friend or enemy. So something menacing is going to edge into your space in an unpleasant way. Giving him an uncanny arc of his ability to trespass spatial distances creates a sense of the uncanny, but it also will allow some menace and some sense that things are happening in time. So that's a little backstage stuff. I'm going to give him bottom up lighting because flashlights at campfires still work well. It's story time. And I'm also going to give him, this is just a thing that creeps me out a little bit. I'm going to give him unusually large nostrils that you can see up. I remember being a kid looking up. I noticed an intimidating and unpleasant feature looking at older relatives and like really older relatives was noticing the depth and wideness of their nostrils. And it's always been a creepy feature that when doing something that's got a certain type of visceral creepiness to it, I try to add in. Looks a lot like Boris Karloff. We gotta fix that. There is kind of a fun, I hate using the word fun, but a trick that I enjoy doing when drawing glasses for if it's somebody creepy or intimidating is making the glasses highly reflective so that you can't see through them, kind of setting up an opposition to what you'd want glasses for. a thought around the mouth and the nasolabial folds and whatnot. I'm not also the fat pads that surround it and cause the nasolabial fold, and nearby lines and whatnot. I'm thinking of them more. I'm not worrying about the accuracy of how they work here, in terms of him having his face strapped with a cloth keeping his jaw from snapping open. I'm thinking more of the crash of soft tissue against the cheekbones. So basically, this area here being loose and mashed and crinkled is what I'm thinking. And I want to put that in, and especially make that a signal to show to give a signature of discomfort. So doing things that contort and distort the face in such a way that if somebody were to grab you like that, you'd go, that sucks. So I want to give over that sense of discomfort in his outfit, basically. His outfit is causing this. I'm not following one of my favorite principles, which is when you start a picture, find the largest brush you can, and then once you've found it, throw it away and get one bigger. In this case, I want to put down as much planar information as possible, and then I can come in and refine as I go. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit of detail work. As I finish up here. So I'm going to be closing this out in just a few minutes. Anybody have any questions or thoughts or things along those lines? Question, thoughts? Um, I'm not sure what what resources might be best. In terms of, I'm sorry, Tom asked, are there any resources you might recommend for the semiotics of body language other than film effects on an audience? Would behavioral body language books be a great resource? I don't think behavioral body language books are necessarily a great resource. Um, I think neurology books are good. I think um, the study of facial expression, even though I know sometimes that one gets some bad press, but it's a much more dynamic and lively um, area of study than the criticisms allow. There's actually a great deal of argument and research done around it. Uh, there's I always recommend studying what you can in neurology, eye movement, bodily systems. Uh, um, like for example, some of the things that are extremely interesting that are coming out have to do with our body maps, the cortical maps, eye movement, attentional awareness things, um, and but also I would say just studying people. A lot of what the science shows isn't necessarily how an artist will use a thing, because we do things in some exaggeration. Like we in art, a we have a couple of properties of narrative that are based on there are facial expressions that have to do with an event driven thing, like an in the moment set of facial expressions. We have a different set of facial expressions that have to do with narrative and our social prestige and communication. So if you're attacked by a bear, you're going to make one set of facial expressions, and those around you will make a set of facial expressions. But if you survive the attack and you're later telling your story, the facial expressions you'll use describing the event are not going to be the ones in the event. They're going to be narrative. They're going to tell parts of your own heroism and prestige, areas that signal people to give you sympathies, things along those lines. So there's a lot of this is still dependent on artists also to help forward the study and information around it. So I would study not necessarily the things that are most conspicuous. I'd study magicians. Magicians use attentional awareness in a lot of the same ways we do, and how we uh, use our faces to signal attentional awareness accidentally and intentionally. So there's a number of different places. There isn't basically there's not an easy central spot to study. To study everything, anything that has to do with human interactions. As you're interacting with people, keep notes. It's your personal experience will also help inform, because you'll start to set up objective principles after a time. Especially if you're drawing them, you'll start to notice, hey, this flexor, that seems to come up quite a bit under certain circumstances. And so you'll be able to note, make contributions to the larger scheme. So I don't know there is a real reliable area of study. In particular, I think there's a number of areas of study. I would, I'm not sure. It's a real difficult area. I'm not sure where to direct you to study exactly. Oh, thanks, Robert. My pleasure. Robert said thanks for doing the stream. Thanks, Lynn. Appreciate it. I'm going to give it another 3 minutes and then I'm going to sign off. Any other questions or thoughts on anything? Oh, thanks, Tom. Oh, thanks, Tom. My pleasure. Thanks for stopping by also. All right. Well, thanks, everybody.